So this is me really. Markets have been part of my life. When I was in school, my dad decided that perhaps it'd be a good job if I stopped hanging around with the crew that I was hanging around with and actually got a proper Saturday job away from paper rounds. And some friends of the family had a market business, and they took me as a 14-year-old, and I went to a place in Mid Wales called Newtown, and I used to go every Saturday and work on the stall there. And to be honest, it was one of the best educations in life that I could possibly have had. It was hard work. But what impressed me at that time, and it's stayed with me since, is how important markets are in communities. We used to have an elderly lady, I still remember her, used to come every Saturday morning about 9:30. She didn't really want much, but we were probably the only people that she spoke to during that week. And we almost became part of her family, and that's never gone away from me about the community importance of markets. So I was lucky to become town clerk in my hometown, which was Oswestry, back in 1984. I was just 25 years old. Didn't really want the job, to be honest, but equally I didn't want anybody else to have it because I'd been there more or less since I'd left school. So I know the background of parish and town councils. I know what a rewarding job it can be when it goes well, but I know as well what a difficult job it can be when perhaps things aren't quite as good. I was president of the former Institute of Market Officers back in 1997, which was a huge honour for me. But I think the biggest accolade that I had in my career, and some of you may remember me doing it, I was president of the Society of Local Council Clerks back in 2017. And in some ways that was indicated really my departure from the sector into NABMA, and I'll explain that a little bit later on. So what I want to cover today, just picking up from some of your comments and your poll earlier on, just looking at the legal status, the history of markets, about your powers as local councils, if you're going to go into markets, or if you're running markets, the different policies that perhaps you can consider, and then taking it much wider to where we are in the sort of the issues of the high street at the moment. And then the survey that we did last year, the state of the nation, the action plan that we've engaged in now, and then how we're working with government. So this is my organisation, the National Association of British Market Authorities. So we've got nearly 300 members now, mainly local authority, but we do have private operators, we have CLCs, we have charities. So we're a limited company. We run through a presidency team and a board of directors, and believe me, working with the board of directors is considerably easier than working with a bunch of local councillors that I did for so many years. We engage a team of consultants who work around the country doing social media, providing legal advice, professional development. And we have still a service level agreement with Oswestry Town Council, my old council, and they provide a fantastic resource for us in terms of administration and finance. And then we work extensively now with government and with an all-party parliamentary group. And it's been interesting how that roller coaster relationship with government has panned out over the years. And at the moment, it's really good. In London last year, and that's just recognising the contribution that markets make to the vibrancy, the diversity of high streets up and down the country. And the fact that he believed, and many believe, that local markets should be at the heart of community life, and they want them to flourish all over the country. And I'll pick up on this and maybe the winners and the losers at the moment from various government initiatives and funding packages that we've seen recently. So what's the benefits of a market? So if you're doing it, you probably recognise some of these. If you're not, then they are worth thinking about. So the first one is economically. Markets bring considerable resources into communities. They support the high street. They support local businesses. They provide employment. Environmentally now, they're becoming more and more recognised, primarily because of the green agenda. If you think about local food now, and you go back to COVID, how important markets became for the supply of essential supplies when people didn't want to go into supermarkets. But you've also got this green agenda where it's local food, it's less packaging, and it's less miles travelled. In terms of education, we are aware of many schools going into markets, trying to understand where food comes from. I know Belfast, when they have their Christmas market there, they take in loads of organisations and schools, and it's like an international learning opportunity. Tourism, everybody knows and looks for markets, I think, when they're away from home. They're a natural draw, whether you're in the UK or whether you're abroad. And in terms of health, we're seeing markets being used much more now by the NHS. So many markets, particularly down in London, are actually doing things like COVID jabs, providing health information, doing different tests on markets. And people are finding that much more acceptable than perhaps going into hospital settings. And then socially, I've mentioned that the dear old lady on the market in mid Wales, but markets are always that focal point, aren't they? You know when a general election's coming because you start to see the prospective candidates out and about on the market. So really two questions, and you've sort of addressed them at the start, what your interest is in markets. But if you're actually running markets or you're thinking about it and you're nearly there, it's very important to know what market powers you have. And it's really interesting how some people I know have been running markets for years and years and years. And you say to them, well, what are your powers? And they don't really know. Well, we've always done it. So we'll have a quick look at that as well. So what's a market? So this is the legal definition. So it's a franchise right of having a concourse of buyers and sellers to dispose of commodities in respect of which the franchise is given. So that was established by legislation in 1887, and that still holds firm. So it's recognized that 5 sellers normally constitute a market. So how do market powers come around? And this is fascinating, really. So the first way is through royal charters and something called letters patent. They're more or less the same. Up to about 1516, most grants were by charters, and then they became by letters patent. Prescription and immemorial use, they simply established that a market's been held as a long user. It's normally, and it's like the footpath legislation, uninterrupted use for 20 years. And then local legislation, that's very important. And then the law, whereas Charles Arnold Baker is the law in parish and town councils, the Pease, Chitty and Cousins law of market fairs, that's the Bible, if you like, for markets. So establishing and operating a market, that gives the operator rights to control other markets, and we'll come on to that. So in terms of exercising control, what I will do is to look at this policy framework again. And parish and town councils, and this is the important part, have a specific power to operate markets. And that power is Part 3 of the Food Act 1984. And that's sort of an overarching policy to use. So you can point to charters, you can point going back to the Lord of the Manor. And in Oswestry, we had a sort of series, if you like, of policies, legislation that indicated that Oswestry had long market rights. They went back to the Lord of the Manor in 1262. We then had charters. There were 2 charters. The last one was by Charles II in 1673. And then there was some consolidation national legislation in 1848 called the Market and Fair Clauses Act. And in Oswestry, they adopted that legislation at the time, and that regulated where markets will be held in the town and on what days. And then in my time, we overarched all those by adding on Part 3 of the Food Act 1984. So in terms of exercising control, you need to act in accordance with your policy. So Part 3 of the Food Act is obviously the best one. It's not arbitrary. As with everything else, it's got to be seen to be reasonable, proportionate, and it's got to be transparent. So if you are challenged, and very often markets are challenged by traders and community, then obviously you need a policy that is transparent. So the next slide, please, John. Yeah, that's just doubled up. Go on to the next one. So in terms of market powers, they're a discretionary service, and therefore it's important if and when you adopt Part 3 of the Food Act that you record it in your minutes and you detail the market days and locations. And it's important to have this markets policy, and I'll come on to that. And then you need to update that resolution on a regular basis. It can be very simple that the Town Council, the Parish Council adopt Part 3 of the Food Act 1984 in respect of its markets activities, which is supplemented by various other under policies. So the next slide. So this is the Food Act of 1984. This is the legislation that you can use to operate markets. So the sections of 50 to 53, they outline days, hours, charges, bylaws. I'll come on to daily travel and crows flying because that's a fascinating one, but you have to support your decision making with a market policy. Just to say we've always done it, obviously nowadays isn't acceptable. And if you're legally challenged, then you need that paperwork, that document to take with you to answer any allegations. So the benefits of using the Food Act. So there's no restriction on charges. This is entirely to what the council want to set, but obviously after consultation. You can control other markets. You can develop your own regulations. It's important to have a market plan. I know my old council, because it was spread around the town, they used to designate different areas. Oh, it's jumped. Don't worry. They used to designate different areas of the town within that policy and the charging structure. So in terms of the Food Act, if you adopt and you resolve to have the market, then there are 3 important things that you need to have in place. The first one is the approval of the landowner. Now, if it's your land, that's helpful. But if you're going onto other people's land, then you need their consent. You will also need planning permission. And the third part there, if a road closure is involved in this, then if it's to be on the highway or on the road, then you will need a consent to do that. And I know in recent months, years, particularly since COVID, how much more difficult it is to get road closures and how much principal councils are starting to charge for them. So I think those are 3 important factors: approval, planning permission, and then if it's on the highway, you need that road closure. So we'll jump to the next slide, John, please. So controlling other markets. If you are a market authority, you've adopted the Food Act and you're starting to operate markets, you actually have protection for your market against any rival activity. And it's fascinating because it just goes back to common law, this is, and it's still proven and it's still accepted that the common law rule is that you have protection for 6 2/3 miles from your market of anybody setting up something which is considered to be a rival. And the 6 2/3, it's fascinating. It was just because it was assumed in years gone by that an individual could travel 20 miles in a day. So they would spend 1/3 of the day at the market, sorry, 1/3 of the day traveling to the market, 1/3 of the day selling at the market, and 1/3 of the day returning home. So 20 miles divided by 3 is 6 2/3 miles, and that's your protection. And it's not restricted to local authority boundaries. And amazingly, it's still measured as a crow would fly in a straight line, hopefully. So if you get a crow that's a bit dodgy and a bit ancient or at a tipple, then you might be able to extend that 6 2/3. But those are still, it's still weird, but those are the common law factors. You have that 6 2/3 miles protection. Next slide, please, John. So those are the types of rival markets. We're seeing car boot sales. So think about that concourse of buyers and sellers, 5 sellers, farmers market, tabletop sales, Christmas markets. Now, years ago, local authorities that ran markets, they were very strict on this. They would oppose anything that was considered to be a rival market. That's not so much the case now. Local authorities tend to support some of these activities. But it's important to remember that if one does become too large, if it does start to infringe on your market activities, then there is that protection that is there, but you have to be able to prove the damages. So if your market's on a Wednesday and a rival market's happening on a Wednesday, it's much easier to prove damages. If you operate on a Wednesday and a rival market starts on a Saturday, then it's much more difficult to do that and to take a case for an interlocutory injunction. So the next slide, please. And this is what the worry was. It's not particularly happening, but with the high street, with the loss of Debenhams and all the big stores, then for a while we were starting to see some of these large units looking towards market activities where they're split down into different franchises. So the next slide. This is the important thing. Once you've decided you want to run a market, then it's important to have a corporate plan. So you need to set out in that plan why you're running the market or running a market. What is your vision? Detail the powers that you're using. If you have, and you like Oswestry, where you went back to Lord of the Manor, local acts, charters, set them out. But ultimately, it is that Food Act, which is the overarching. You need to detail the sites that you're going to use for the markets, the days, the hours. It's important to be transparent and put in there your charging structure as well. And then who do you want to trade? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? And we've had a query this week where a market has had an application from a trader who wants to sharpen knives on the market. Now, the general view is that that's not acceptable, because to bring those knives to the market, they would be bringing a weapon, if you like, through a public space. So all sorts of interesting ones come about. And then licensing arrangements. You can, if you are a market authority, license others to run the market on your behalf, or you can license activities. You can license car boot sales. Now, it may be, if it's a charity, you want to do that and just give it them free of charge, but document it. It could be, if it's a commercial activity, that you actually want to license it and charge them a fee. So being a market authority, you can generate income by licensing others. So the next slide, please, John. So underneath that corporate policy, you will need other policies to operate markets. So you'll need regulations to tell traders what they can and can't do. The normal stuff that you would see with parish and town councils: health and safety, risk assessments, equality. You need a clear, transparent application process. A balance of trade policy is something that a lot of markets now introduce, because you don't want 10 dog bed stalls. You want to try and put limitations so that the market's attractive, it's of interest. You don't want a multitude of the same trades. Very important to have disciplinary procedures in there. This is generally where traders start to introduce things that's not on their license, and then complaints come in, and then it escalates. And then it's also important to have in that policy something around consultation. How are you going to consult with traders? How are you going to consult with members of the public about the market, about changes, etc.? Next slide, please. And also, in a market license, it's important to have what the trader can sell, what's acceptable. Very important to set that out and almost to be specific in it. Detail the days, the times of trading, what you expect from the traders. You know, if you're open from 8 till 2, you don't want traders turning up 10 till 12. How they're going to pay the fees, how you're going to collect them. You could be using a Scribe booking package. You never know, John. An opportunity for you there. And then, of course, the rules, the regulations of the market. The next slide. So this is the markets industry. This was before COVID. So government was recognising it, Institute of Place Management, that it was in the top 25 factors to help deliver vibrant high streets. There are about 1,200 traditional markets in the UK. Obviously, there are a lot more speciality markets, continental markets. 84% local authority operated, and that includes local councils. And what's interesting now, NABMA is approaching 100 parish and town council members. When I became town clerk back in '84, I think there were only 3. It was Oswestry, Bridgnorth and Ludlow. It's now incredible, the number of parish and town councils taking on markets under Devolvement, Localism Act, etc. Originally, it was 42,000 small businesses supported by markets with a huge turnover. Things have changed since COVID, and we'll jump onto that now. So the next slide, please, John. COVID had a massive impact on markets. So I'm sure most of you who operate markets will know there was little or no financial support came down for operators from government. We know that across the country, about a third of traders had no financial support for different reasons. And in our survey during COVID, 85% of our operators, 300 members, had concerns for the future. It's a discretionary local government service. We know during COVID there was little or no support for local councils. All the funding went to the principal councils, and we know in most cases that was never passed down into your sector. And obviously there's an impact on local council finance in terms of running markets. And during COVID, many markets didn't charge any rent. And in the period coming out of COVID, to try and revive the market, bring traders back, again, no income was taken. So the next slide, John. So why are they important to the high street? Why are they important to your community? So very quickly, a national employer. And this is the important thing now. So many people lost their jobs during COVID, their employment was displaced, and markets are starting to see an influx of people coming into the trade for the first time because it's low entry, they're great business incubators, there's little risk. They contribute financially to local activities, they've got a positive impact on communities, a place of social interaction. And the next one, John, please. They're crucial. Somebody said at the start, I think it was Petra, about we're a market town, and that is about tradition. It's about history. They're flexible. And it was interesting that markets have always been in the same place in some towns for hundreds of years. But it was interesting that during COVID, they moved. And they had to move because of creating space for people flow. And in some situations, some of those markets have actually stayed in their temporary locations because it's generally been felt by the community that the market is in a better place now than it's been for 100 years. Provide access to essential, affordable goods. They did an amazing job during COVID. If you think about fruit and veg, many people preferred to go to an outdoor market thinking it was safer than actually going to a supermarket. And then they support community cohesion. We're seeing examples now of many markets providing so many services now, filling gaps. So you've got things like libraries being operated out of markets, health services, safer policing teams operating out of markets. So we're starting to see all this happening. Cooking schools. There's a Jamie Oliver cooking school in Leeds Market that we were talking about just a few days ago. So the next slide, please. So why are they important to local councils? So local councils, to me, they're about people in place, and they embrace those two. They bring people together. They promote. They bring vibrancy to place. They generate footfall. All about colour, atmosphere, finance. There are so many town councils, parish councils now operating markets and doing it so well. I've mentioned the low risk, the business startup, and I've mentioned about the food provenance agenda, this green agenda now where people are wanting local food. They want to know where it's come from. And some markets are seeing such a revival now in food. And there are investment now into markets. Anybody who lives near my part of the world, Chester Market opened last year. It's great, whether it's a market or whether it's a food court, the dialogue still goes on. Warrington Market, again, an amazing food scene, entertainment scene in that market. And markets generally now are starting to be seen to support the revival and the survival of the high street. So the next one, please, John. So our survey last year, we wanted to test, coming out of COVID, what the health of the industry was. And there were some worrying headlines in there. So stall occupancy on markets down to 72%. We think it's actually worse than that because many markets, they've contracted in size anyway. So we feel that 72% is probably lower. The number of traders has dropped down. The survey last year, 32,000. We believe it's much less than that now. What's really worrying, only 8% of traders on markets now are actually under 40 years of age. 84% operated by local authorities, of which 25% are local councils. It's worrying that only 40% now have a financial surplus. 73% of markets have no discussions, no liaison, no consultation between the operators and their traders, which is a real worry, particularly for the National Market Traders Federation. And last year, just 25 markets received 127 million from government. The question is, what about the rest? So the next slide, John. So those were our priorities for this year: recruiting new traders and growing a business, trying to get markets profitable, demonstrating their value, improving relationships with traders, and importantly, making market management more professional. So we have come up with a campaign called Markets First. We launched it in April this year. It's got 5 priorities that's based around that slide. So the first one is attracting and retaining traders. Not only do we want to attract them, but to try and help and sustain those businesses that's already there. The second one is looking at the economic challenges of markets. Now, in that are issues like business rates, VAT. They're big issues to some of our members. The third one is demonstrating to government the widest value of markets. And I've mentioned about community already. I've mentioned about cooking schools, safer teams, working with NHS. And government have been in awe of some of this. They just didn't realise, what it was about. And I remember one discussion during COVID with a civil servant. And it was clear she hadn't got a clue beyond the M25. And her comment was, David, just tell me, please, what is a market? I don't really understand them. I'm thinking, wow, that is a bit worrying. Our fourth priority is professionalising market management, and that's stuff that we're doing internally. And then the fifth one is about working with traders. So the next slide, please, John. These are initiatives that have been running. I'm conscious of time, so we'll jump through them. But we operate Love Your Local Market. It's for a fortnight in May every year. National Young Traders Market, worked by NMTF. It's a fantastic resort, over 100 events a year. The final at Stratford-upon-Avon on the August bank holiday. Wonderful to see all these youngsters now setting up businesses. We have Great British Market Awards, and at the moment we're in the middle of online voting for Britain's favourite market. Any of this you can see on our website.